First up is Cyrano, which is an adaptation of the play Cyrano de Bergerac. It stars Peter Dinklage as the titular character. Haley Bennett is playing Roxanne, Kelvin Harrison Jr. is playing Christian, and Ben Mendelsohn is playing the Duke. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically the story of a catfish in some senses. Cyrano is in love with Roxanne. She's possibly in love with someone else. And so he helps this other person using his words, because he's very verbose and eloquent with his speech. He helps that person woo her, but he's the one who actually loved her. It's a sad story in many senses. One of my favorite portrayals is the Steve Martin one in Roxanne with Daryl Hannah and Shelley Duvall, which, it's an odd role for Steve Martin, but it really works. So anyway, this is a musical. It's a full-on, outright, we're singing, we're dancing, we've got choreography musical, and I love plenty of musicals, but I got the sense that this was not going to be for me, and I wasn't wrong. I do think there's absolutely an audience for it, but I kept thinking, Peter Dinklage is not a great singer. And I don't know nobody else in the film is a particularly spectacular singer, but I kept wondering, if the music, because the music wasn't bad. I actually did find it sort of catchy at points. And if the role had been cast with someone who could really belt in it, I feel like it could have taken it to the next level. But instead, you've got this sort of talk, sing stuff. There's so much exposition in this movie. And I feel like it focuses on those moments and on obviously the dance and song numbers, and doesn't give as much time to the relationship development, which is what you need in the story of Cyrano, right? You need to be heartbroken for him so I don't know if he loves her so much that he wants to see her happy because she likes this other guy, and he's like, all right, well, I'll help this other guy figure it out. But, it's a complicated story, but it didn't quite click for me, and I saw the potential in it, but it's directed by Joe Wright, who I'm hit or miss on. And Peter Dinklage is actually not. I think he's done some great performances, but everything Game of Thrones forward, I feel like he just got sort of stuck in the Tyrion Lannister mode, and he does that fake bad, European British-ish accent, and I think he's having trouble leaving that behind him, and this didn't help with that. So it's not my favorite story to start, because I don't like the idea of men being, rewarded essentially for tricking women, so that there's that aspect of it. But I also I wanted more from this if it was going to do it. I wanted it to be even more all out, and it felt sort of constrained in some places, and I just wasn't invested in the dynamics of the characters, which is really, it's the core of the story of Cyrano. So I do think, if you watch the trailer and you're like, yeah, this, I think you won't be super disappointed by it. But if you watch the trailer and you're like, absolutely not, you are correct. That is the correct, you trust your gut on that one. So I'm going to give it 2.9 out of 5. And then the other movie I have this week is called Studio 666, and it's actually also in the sort of theme of music. It's a Foo Fighters horror movie, and, again with this one, I know from the get-go I am not the target audience for this. I don't like horror movies. I do like the Foo Fighters, but I would not consider myself a mega fan. I think Dave Grohl is a hugely entertaining personality, all the stuff he does on the web and all of his appearances, I think he's spectacular, right? But I don't know enough about the other Foo Fighters to know about their personalities and whether or not they can act, which is a requirement to do a movie. And then also, I know some of their music, but I wouldn't consider myself a mega fan, and I will be upfront about that. And so I was trying to watch it through the lens of, all right, well, let's assume I was a mega fan, and let's assume I also liked horror. So I'm stretching here. Would I like this movie? And I don't think the answer is yes, because it's a B-movie horror, right? So it's overly gory and gross and intentionally these ways, but it almost didn't go far enough. Or like certain things, you could tell where they spent the budget and where they didn't. There was one scene where literally it looked like the visual effects had been done in iMovie from 10 years ago, which, again, I know this is not trying to be some artistic A-level, super... I know it's not trying to be it or trying to be, a Jordan Peele horror movie or anything like that, right? It knows what it's trying to be. I just don't think it achieves it. And then, trying to think about, all right, well, I don't know the dynamics of the band, but are they playing off of each other in a fun way that maybe if I was a super fan, I'd be like, oh, that's so Taylor-y or that's so Nate. And I don't know their names. I have them in front of me, which is why I can say these things. I don't get the sense that the answer would be yes. I feel like they were all very uncomfortable doing this, and it's something new for them. It's a full-on acting role, and you're being asked to dramatize. It's not a music video. It's technically a feature film. My God, is it long for what it should be? It's an hour and 46 minutes. Should have been a tight 90. That's what I'm going to throw out there. And then there's all this weird stuff where like Whitney Cummings is their neighbor, and Will Forte shows up, and Jeff Garlin is their manager, and it's so all over the place. And there are moments where I was like, if this had been pushed to be even more absurd, I think it would have resonated more. And then I also think if they had tried to cater to the sort of acting weaknesses, I'm not saying they're weak, but just the acting lack of experience for the band themselves, we also could have maybe gotten more out of this. And, obviously it's trying to rely on Dave Grohl, who is an entertainer, right? But even he cannot carry this entire thing on his own. And then there's the music aspect where they're not playing as much of their popular stuff, I would say, or the music they're trying to make within it does not fall into maybe stuff that is intended for a wider audience. But I think about things like Beatles movies, right? Like A Hard Day's Night, or if you've ever seen Help, the ones where they're like trying to act, they are also not great actors, and they are essentially playing themselves, as are the Foo Fighters here. But those guys just had, maybe it's because I'm watching it under the lens of knowing that they were the Beatles and their history and stuff like that, and I knew more about them. But those films as a whole felt more fun and silly and etc. Whereas this was trying to do something, and I don't think it quite accomplished it. So I would say that unless you are a super hardcore Foo Fighters fan, you love everything they do, you want to see every show, you want to whatever, like, unless you fall into that category, I think it's probably a pass. Because if you are a super horror fan and you're like, yeah, gore, blood, guts, blood, it's someone who gets really scared by films. It wasn't that scary. I know they're trying to go for comedy with a lot of it too. Didn't really find it that funny. I think there are moments where you just needed to make it more extreme. So fortunately, I just think, it's not going to land for most of the population. So I'm going to give it 2.4 out of 5.